what Trump is doing is revealing the real balance of forces, the real relationship that exists between Europe, which is a collection of insignificant minor powers in a period of long-term decline, and the United States, which is much more powerful. And once this U.S. protective layer is withdrawn, the real position is revealed.
Welcome to Against the Stream, the communist podcast that cuts through the noise to reveal the class interests that shape our world. If you're new here, you should know this. First of all, this is not an impartial podcast. We stand on the side of the workers, the poor, and the oppressed everywhere in the world. We also stand for the highest objectivity. We want to change the world and overthrow capitalism. But in order to do that, we need to understand it first. My name is Hamid Alizadeh, and I'm here today with my co-host, Jorge Martín. Welcome back. In today's show, we'll be talking about Minnesota rising against ICE. We'll look at the self-organization that's taking place in Minneapolis and what it means for the future of the class struggle in the US. For our main story, Trump declares war on Europe and what this means for the new world order that we're entering. And finally, we'll answer a question that many viewers have asked, which is, if you're a communist, why do you have a MacBook?
I don't have a MacBook.
You don't have a MacBook.
But we'll come to that.
I have one.
We'll
and
come to that.
Pretty happy about it. So, Minneapolis. We talked about it last week. There's an ongoing situation. Several thousand, I think it's now up to 3,000 ICE enforcement officers have been unleashed in the city of Minneapolis. They're having these extremely high targets of so-called illegal immigrants that they have to capture and deport.
And they're using very brutal and sly tactics as well. Yeah. They are entering people's homes without a warrant. They have just a general idea that there might be someone there who they want to get, and they're basically violating even their own bourgeois laws of the United States. Yeah. There was a recent case in which they used a 4-year-old migrant, to try to get his dad, and then they deported the two of them to a detention center in Texas. They're going into places of worship. They're going into schools. They're going into workplaces, into restaurants. They're really seen, and they are de facto as a foreign occupation force instead of a law enforcement of any kind.
Yes, they killed, obviously, Renee Good, and they've shot
a Venezuelan migrant in the leg.
Yes, and in general, they act with absolute brutality. Mm-hmm. And this is not just repelling us, but this has caused a backlash in the U.S., in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, in particular, where Renee Good lived. And that's what we want to talk about. There's been a furious backlash response to this, actually.
I mean, this is a continuation of what already happened last year in California, in Chicago. Everywhere they go, they provoke a big backlash. And now there are some opinion polls that there's been a massive shift in public opinion after the killing, unlawful killing of Renee Good, which now the U.S. administration says that the person who killed her, Johnson, is that his name? Mm-hmm. Is going to have complete impunity. So as I was saying, there's been a massive change in public opinion. Last summer, the idea that ICE should be abolished was supported by a small minority of the people in the United States, and now I think it's 48% of people, when asked, they say that they would like ICE to be abolished, as opposed to
46% who are
46% in favor of the abolition of ICE, 43% against. So this is a big turnaround, and it means that even a lot of people who voted for Trump originally one year and a bit ago, they're now against this.
Yes, the mood is shifting quite fast, and I think obviously this completely dispels all the ideas that America was moving to the right. There's a reactionary situation. We should all be afraid. Actually, this is having the opposite effect. This is actually raising class consciousness. This is radicalizing people. And this is radicalizing people on a working class basis.
Yes. I think that's what's most extraordinary is the videos that we have all seen shared on social media of people actually confronting ICE and pushing them back and kicking them out from neighborhoods and from places where they want to carry out raids. I mean, I personally am a bit shocked about these videos, right? Because ICE agents have just killed one person who was unarmed and peaceful, and still people are physically confronting these heavily armed agents of the law, which are acting with complete impunity and in an unlawful manner. I think it's quite remarkable.
Let's why don't we watch some of these videos?
Yes.
New video shows federal agents arriving at a popular Minneapolis restaurant, but employees in the community stood in their way.
It looks like they are throwing snowballs as the officers are leaving.
Yeah, what you can see is that there is a widespread rapid response networks in the community where people are just warning each other that ICE in the neighborhood, they're carrying out a raid, that for people to be careful, and for people to come out and confront them. They're using horns in the cars, they're beeping the horns, they're using loudspeakers, they're using whistles to attract attention. And basically is an incredible example of self-organization in the neighborhoods by working class communities turning out and helping each other, helping their neighbors against these ICE raids. And it's quite remarkable.
Yeah, there is a right-winger activist, so-called activist, Jake Lang. He went to Minneapolis. He wanted to perform.
He wanted to carry out a provocation. This is a far-right provocateur. And he announced that he was going to go to Minneapolis on the steps of the city hall and burn a Quran.
Yeah.
And he's been campaigning against all these Somali fraudsters and so on, just trying to incite racial hatred.
Yeah.
So he did go at the weekend. And you can see from what happened in that incident, you can see the real balance of forces. What happened is this. He called for this rally, and he managed to get the total of 15 people to turn up with him, so it's a very small number. And then there was a big counter demonstration of hundreds of counter protesters, even though some of the community and religious leaders had said, no, people stay home, don't fall for provocations. We don't want to give the impression that there's a big fight or whatever. Yeah. But still, hundreds of anti-fascists came out, and they physically blocked him and prevented him from moving 1 inch from the steps of City Hall. He was unable to burn the Quran. He was unable to address the crowd, which consists of 15 people. Yeah. And he had to be physically escorted out and kicked out by the crowd of anti-fascists. I'd say that this reflects the real balance of forces. After days and weeks of a campaign against Somalian people are all fraudsters and they're all here and this and that. And this campaign has been amplified by the mass media. And still all he could get was 15 people for this right-wing provocation. Yeah. I think that's quite significant.
That's the real mood. That's the real mood. This is not a mood of brutal repressive reaction. This is obviously brutal repressive actions, but it is not a state and a ruling class that is able to impose like a total
and in control of the situation,
total control of the situation. I'm sure they would like to. Yes. I'm sure Trump wouldn't mind, being a proper king and all. Yes. But that's just not in the cards, precisely because of the backlash. In fact, I would say this: the effect that this has had is the exact opposite of the intention. The real intention behind these raids and the increased rate and the increased provocations by ICE has been what? To distract attention from the real conditions on the ground. Yes. The cost of living crisis has not been solved in the U.S. There's increasing anger and dissatisfaction with Trump.
His popularity ratings are
falling. And then we have the and as a result of all of this, we had the Epstein files, which were released or supposedly released.
Yes, or not released.
And not released. Only 6% of Americans are happy with the amount of files that have been released. That shows you something. And that was becoming a big problem for Trump. And obviously, this is a way of ramping up that and distracting attention and trying to divide the working class along.
Yes. And trying to demonstrate
lines.
that Trump is strong, and it's now demonstrating the opposite. And further than that, now let's call it a general strike has been called in Minneapolis on Friday the 23rd. It's not exactly a general strike, but community leaders, religious leaders, and so on, they have called for a complete shutdown, a day of no work, no shopping, and no schools. And a number of unions have come on board with that. The local AFL-CIO, the local kind of confederation of the unions in the Twin Cities, has endorsed the action. And even though this is not a general strike as such, because the unions are saying people should just stay home, but this is not a legal call for strike and
They're
so on.
not going all in.
But there is the potential, and this is the direction things are going towards local, regional, general strikes. And
I think just before we end, our American comrades have written a very good article describing the situation in Minneapolis and commenting on it. It's called Anti-Ice Rage Surges in Minnesota, Prepare for a General Strike. We're going to put the link in the description for everyone to see. But I was reading it and I thought, I just want to do a whole show where I'm just reading this article because there's so many interesting things there. Yes. But just this is one of our comrades in Minneapolis. It says, events in Minneapolis have continued to escalate. Following the mass meeting last week, there's mass meetings everywhere. There's mass organization in all sorts of committees. Following the mass meeting last week, this was a meeting the comrade went to where more than 1,000 people came in just a small neighborhood. Yes. Right? Posters have been popping up around the neighborhood with links and QR codes to join neighborhood formations. A lot of neighborhood defense groups have activist leadership or self-appointed captains. The local community groups and activist groups have spearheaded the organizational elements of these formations. They are being visibly strained by the sheer number of people entering this movement. So what it says here is, this movement is far beyond the normal, usual suspects of the left and the activist layer, so to say. Then it says, there seems to be nearly a dozen signal groups chats set up for a lot of different neighborhoods across the city. The organizers have had to create duplicates because the signal's size limitations. Just in my neighborhood, there are already 3 rapid response group chats because the first 2 reached the 1,000 person limit. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, 3,000 people just in one
self-organization of working class people. And then the article comments, it says, in the discussion with the community meetings, the comrades emphasized the need to make these mass meetings regular and to discuss the lessons of other neighborhood committees to generalize them across the movement. The comrades also argued the need to elect a centralized citywide leadership made up of delegates from each neighborhood committee. Lastly, the comrades made the case to draw in the unions, to have union members form their own strike committees if necessary, and to build towards a city and statewide general strike to paralyze Minneapolis until ICE is forced out entirely. These ideas were met with the utmost enthusiasm. That's a quote from the comrades' report themselves. This is incredible. This is
the real mood in America.
This is the real mood, and what Trump's actions are doing is actually radicalizing the situation, but and also bringing out the real balance of forces. The working class. It is the mass of propertyless people. They might own a house, but they don't own property, productive property. They don't own factories. They don't own businesses. They're forced to work. They're forced to sell the labor in order to survive. But that also means that they are the producers of all of the wealth in society. They control everything in potential. I think it's Ted Grant who used to say, not a light bulb shines and not a wheel turns
without the permission of the working class.
Permission of the working class. In normal times, this is kept a secret. The whole of the effort of the ruling class through its media, through its propaganda channels, is made to distort this fact and to distort from the fact that there is even a working class and that it has such a position in society. But as we know, as the crisis deepens and the workers are forced to take action, they become aware of their own forces. And their true class nature is expressed in particular in these kind of moves, in self-organization, in extremely radical move. And with every step forward, they gain confidence. And the class interests become clearer to themselves. Obviously, the highest form of class consciousness is realizing that actually they could take power in society and they don't need the bosses at all. But this is a step in that direction. And this is not helping Trump. In fact, what Trump is doing, he is pushing, he's accelerating by his actions, by his provocative actions, he's accelerating this process.
Yes. He thought that these very provocative rights were going to strengthen him, but it's precisely the opposite. It's creating a massive backlash.
Yes. I think we can, again, this is an ongoing situation. We can come back to this. But just to say, as our viewers and listeners might gather, this is not just a podcast of a few guys who like to sit and talk about world politics. This is a podcast of the Revolutionary Communist International, a communist organization that organizes in more than 60 countries, with ambitions to organize in every country.
Including in the United States.
Including in the United States. We have the Revolutionary Communists of America, which is our section in the United States that you can join. And you can join us anywhere in the world you are when you listen to this. If you agree with our ideas or you're interested, you should check the link in the description, marxist.com/join us. I believe it is. Okay, let's move on. This has been a whirlwind of a week, if there ever was one. I mean, under Trump, I guess no week is boring.
Yes. But you wake up in the morning and you see this flurry of Truth Social posts by Trump, which were really a provocation against Europe. The aim was to humiliate all European leaders ahead of his visit to Davos in Switzerland for this meeting of the rich and powerful.
Yes. Davos is where all the rich and powerful of the Western world, more or less, meet. Sometimes they invite their buddies from the so-called Eastern world.
Once a year.
And they meet once a year. Big business, big politician, the real sources of power on this planet. And without any democratic oversight, of course. And they plan and they mingle and they network and they lay out their plans for the next year. This year, Trump came in after a week of increasingly forcefully pushing the idea that the United States must annex Greenland one way or another. He even implied that they would do it by military means if Denmark wouldn't sell Greenland. And this caused an absolute furore in Europe. There were military expedition of European countries. The coalition of the willing was sent to Greenland, consisting of how many people? A couple of dozen.
One from Britain, 15 from Germany.
The Germans secretly went, without making a noise, went home after 2 days.
Yes.
But we said this last year. We already commented on this question of Greenland. Trump has been talking about this for a while now.
In fact, he already mentioned this in his first term in office.
Yes. And this is not just Trump. This has been on the agenda of many American presidents.
Yes.
But just to briefly go over what is behind his desire to take Greenland. Why does Trump want Greenland?
I think there's different reasons. They have said that they need Greenland from the point of view of the national security of the United States. And this does make sense. With the climate change, with global warming, a number of shipping lanes in the Arctic are becoming now more transitable, not only in the summer, but also in the winter, and new routes are being opened. And also the thawing of the polar ice cap is now opening up mineral resources in Greenland for exploitation. So here you have two things. One, shipping trading routes. Now, for instance, there was I think it was a Turkish shipping company went from China to Felixstowe, main port in the UK, through the Arctic route. therefore cutting the time by half than if you go through the Suez Canal longer route. So that's potentially quite important. And anyone who controls those shipping lanes will have a big importance for world trade and supply lanes and so on, supply chains and so on. That's one. Number two is, and the United States wants to have control over that, and above all, to prevent other powers from having control over it. Number two is this question of mineral resources in Greenland. Greenland is one of the largest deposits in the world of rare earth minerals, which are very important for magnets, which have military applications, top technology developments, and so on. And they want to have control over this. And they don't want other powers to have control over this. There's a Chinese company that has a minority share in a mining company that was planning to mine in Greenland and so on. The Chinese have been interested in this for some time. And clearly the United States national security strategy says that the United States requires control over key mineral resources and infrastructure facilities throughout the whole of the Western Hemisphere. And this is part of that. And I will say that from the point of view of the ruling class in the United States, imperialist ruling class in the United States, this is quite important. Added to this, Trump has also spoken of this, is it called the Golden Dome? Missile defense system that he wants to install. And they're saying that some of these missiles need to be installed in Greenland. And it's not enough that Denmark may be an ally of the United States, a NATO member, that they already have an agreement going back to 1951 for US military bases in Greenland. No, they want something more permanent, more secure, that doesn't depend on anyone else other than the United States. They want to have key control over things that they consider are important for the national security strategy. This is the national security strategy of US imperialism, the big interest of the big multinational companies. Of course, there is also an element of Trump himself, right? He's a megalomaniac narcissist, and he wants to leave a legacy, as he says, of having extended the geographical footprint of the country, and maybe get his face on Mount Rushmore and stuff like that. But that is an element to this. I will say that after the military attack on Venezuela on January the 3rd, which they consider to have been very successful, they are also a little bit drunk with success, and they want to push the momentum that they think they have onto other conflicts that they want to solve. And Greenland is part of that. In fact, Greenland was mentioned on the 4th of January in the press conference, on the 3rd of January in the press conference when they announced that they had kidnapped the president of Venezuela and so on. So, yes, this is why it is so important for Trump and for US imperialism to have control over Greenland one way or another.
I would say I would just add one thing, which is also internally, this is a distraction.
Yes.
And this idea of successful imperialist foreign adventures creating a temporary boost for the popularity of Trump. I think that's also an element in the whole situation.
Clearly, yeah.
Obviously, these boosts are rarely lasting, and also the successes are rarely lasting. We haven't seen the end of what's going to happen in Venezuela. But it's clear to me that with this, the national security document talks about our hemisphere. They're out there talking with the most open imperialist language they possibly can. The old gang, they used to talk about the rule-based order and, but these
democratic rights, national sovereignty.
Rights. These guys just say it as it is.
Yes.
Our hemisphere. And the US has moved from our world, which was the old mantra of the US imperialism, to our hemisphere, first and foremost, and then we can fight over the rest of the world. This is an entirely new situation, obviously. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, he had an interesting, he was in Davos as well.
Yes.
He spoke.
He wrote an article which I think was the basis for his speech.
He was repeating the same thing.
Yeah, he was booed at the end of that speech and so on. But at least you have to give it to him that he spoke clearly about what
He says
US
what he wants.
imperialism wants.
Although I have to say he mixes in a lot
Yes.
about the American worker and reindustrialization.
Yes.
That's just for play, and that's playing to his audience at home.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what I'm just going to quote from the article. It says, "Why is the Trump administration going to Davos at all? Why show up and participate when we've been so clear that the old globalist line of thinking has been a disaster for America? The answer is simple. We're going to Davos we're not going to Davos to uphold the status quo. We're going to confront it head on. Under President Donald Trump's leadership, we're going in a new direction. This administration is putting America first. We are here at Davos to make one thing crystal clear. With President Trump, capitalism has a new sheriff in town."
Yes. You
bet.
have to wonder the language they use. Just to say one thing, it's not true that America did not benefit from the previous globalist order. That previous globalist order was also dominated by U.S. imperialism, and U.S. imperialism greatly benefited from free trade, which wasn't free at all, and the domination of the world. But that's come to an end. In this, he is correct in saying that that's come to an end, and now the policy of U.S. imperialism is completely different, is make America great first, America first. And America
at the
first
expense
means,
of everyone else.
yeah, America first means everyone else is second.
You guys have to pay.
Yes.
Well, we'll get to that. First of all, I think we should just Greenland, because this has been a big thing. I mean, obviously in Denmark, the media is up in arms about the horrific actions of Donald Trump. How dare he come and take Greenland? And elsewhere in Europe, there's been kind of this democratic outrage, right? But let's just spell out the facts, because Greenland is not Denmark. Greenland belongs to Denmark.
It's
Greenland
a colony.
is a colony of Denmark. People know about Denmark. They think about hygge. They think about Scandinavian socialism. They think about these cozy, peaceful people. But here it is, the most peaceful and most happy people on the planet, not the people, the ruling class, has its own colony. One of the last remaining ones in the world. It's an island of 57,000 inhabitants. And it has been throughout the last 300 years of domination by Denmark. It has been, and up until very recently, up until now, it has been the victim of enormous crimes by Danish capitalism. We're talking mass displacement, sterilization, forced sterilization of young girls down to the age of 13, experiments. These are all from the past 100 years or 50 years. Experiments of kidnapping children from Greenland and placing them in Danish families to so-called civilize them. The way that Greenland is talked about in them, it's just insane, and no one talks about it. No one says anything amongst all of the politicians. And the media is openly talked about like a subhuman race, and is treated as such. The social conditions that exist in Greenland are terrible.
This has led to high levels of alcoholism and suicide.
Incredibly high levels of alcoholism, sexual abuse. I don't have the figures yet, but the sexual abuse figures from Greenland are out of this world. Life expectancy in Greenland is 69 years for men, 73 for women. That's 10 years less than Denmark. And it's the same level as Syria, which has just been through a 13-year civil war. By the way, these figures are in a really, really good article by our Danish comrades. I put the link in the description. We're going to ask for them to translate this, to put it on Marxist.com, but people can read it with Google Translate. And they say here, in the weekend between the 19th and 21st of December, 6 young people committed suicide in Greenland. You might think, okay, that's a lot, obviously, but it's 6 people. But out of a population of 57,000, that is a lot. And this is not an extraordinary event. This is a regular event. If we extrapolate that to England and Wales, that would mean that in these two nations you would have 6,400 suicides approximately
in one weekend.
In one weekend.
Yes.
It just so happens that the yearly suicide rate in England and Wales is 6,200. That's the conditions in Greenland imposed on by the colonial master Denmark. And you know, there's a podcast that is a right-wing podcast that they ran. I might say it. I mean, we might as well quote them. They say a lot of nonsense. Sometimes they make an interesting point here and there. But actually, this one time, one of them, he made an interesting point. He said, well, if the Danes are so busy, so bothered about defending and protecting Greenland, why didn't they just call a referendum when Trump asked for this?
Yes.
Let's call an independence referendum. No, but the Greenlandish people have been wanting independence for decades, and the Danish ruling class has refused them that, right? Because it's a cash cow, and it means that Denmark can play
an outsized role in the world. Yes,
because of the position of Greenland, the minerals, and all the other things that they have.
And now the Danish capitalists and the European capitalists are outraged at this suggestion that the United States may invade or buy off Greenland.
Yeah.
But excuse me 1 second. Just a few days ago, when the United States invaded Venezuela, kidnapped the sitting head of state, none of the European countries said anything. They backed the United States, either de facto or by silence. Yeah. When the United States attacks when Israel commits a genocide in Gaza, all the European countries talk about is the right of Israel to defend itself. Yeah. And so they go along with every single adventure of U.S. imperialism. They back it. They fund NATO. They send troops to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to help the United States, and violates national sovereignty of several countries and carry out invasions and so on. And now they complain when it comes to them.
That's the point. That's the point. I asked Grok AI to give me a list of foreign interventions by U.S. imperialism in the past since World War II, and it came up with about 80. Some of them were several times in the same country. There's about 60 to 70 countries, but 80 interventions, regime change operations, wars, invasions.
I think it might be more.
It misses out a lot.
80,
that's already a big...
Yes.
This is obviously the most reactionary force that has ever existed on the planet. If there was ever a revolution anywhere in the planet, if working people anywhere tried to take power or change their lives for the better, they could count on one thing, that U.S. imperialism, directly or by proxy, would oppose them with all of its might. And in all of these wars, and in all of these interventions, and in all of these counter-revolutionary actions, the entire Western world has been behind them.
Yes.
But as you say, this time, it's against them.
Yes.
They are the victims. This is what they don't like.
Yes.
And I think, this highlights an important point. Trump says, you guys have been leeching on U.S. imperialism. And he's right, because the old world order was based on an American imperialism and under its umbrella, European imperialism dominating the entirety of the capitalist world. Right after the Soviet Union, it was more or less it was the entirety of the world. And these tiny imperialists in Denmark and Sweden and Germany and France, the insignificant who otherwise would have played an insignificant role, they could benefit from this. They could strut around in the world, getting benefits through all of these things to suit their own ruling classes.
In fact, I saw a map just in the last few days. I saw a map of the total number of U.S. military bases in Western Europe, and it's every single country. Every single country has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 military bases, hundreds, thousands of soldiers. And these military bases are used by the United States to attack Iraq, to attack Libya, to bomb Syria, everywhere, but they're now complaining because they are at the receiving end of what yesterday they were fully supporting and benefiting from.
What's happening is, we talked about rehemispherization, the U.S. retreating to its own hemisphere. What's happening is, we've explained this many times in the podcast. We're not going to go into detail, but what's happening is, American imperialism has reached a limit. and it's been checked by the rise of China economically and by Russia militarily. It does not have, in relative terms, the power that it used to have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in a state of decline. That is what it is. Peaked, let's say like this. And what always happens to an empire or a social system in crisis is that it's how to say, it gathers its resources
At the core.
Mm-hmm. I think I've said this before. This morning, I went ice dipping. I have an ice plunge in my garden.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. But my hands or feet are cold during the day. Why? Because the body is in a state of shock. It gathers resources in the how to say, at the center,
Mm-hmm.
and the periphery freezes. And that's what's happening. American imperialism has realized, yes, it's not able to develop the productive forces.
Mm-hmm.
It's not able to compete in open competition. So it's shutting itself in, and is looting and how to say, squeezing Europe and all of its other dependencies for as much as it can.
Yes. In fact, the Europeans are completely scandalized and hysterical. But the reason for that is because what Trump is doing is revealing the real balance of forces, the real relationship that exists between Europe, which is a collection of insignificant minor powers in a period of long-term decline, and the United States, which is much more powerful. And once this U.S. protective layer is withdrawn, the real position is revealed. Now it seems that Trump says that they reached some sort of agreement. I don't know what agreement is that, because it was basically a conversation between Trump and Mark Rutte, the General Secretary of NATO. The Danish were not even involved. Never mind the Greenland.
Never mind the
Greenlanders. But no one was involved other than these two guys sitting in a room. And obviously, Rutte must have made some concessions. But anyway, never mind that there seems to be more or less a deal, which we don't know the details of. But the day before, Trump was threatening tariffs on Europe. And here we see...
And military attack.
And military attack. And here we see the real position. Yeah. What was Europe's response to that? Nothing. They all running around. They don't know what to do. They say, oh, maybe we're going to put counter tariffs on the United States, but they don't dare do that. They are at they are completely...
They sent military forces to Greenland, and then afterwards they said, oh no, that was just because Trump said we can't protect Greenland.
Yes,
and so now we're going
in order to help the United States.
I think Ben Curry, who's another co-host here, he said the other day that it's like a child, or like a weakling who's like waving a fist at a bully, and then when the bully turns around, he's like, "Oh no, I was just
it wasn't me. It wasn't me." Yes.
I mean, Denmark has a military force of 21,000 people, and it is the most cowardice ruling class in world history. When the Germans invaded during World War II, they put up no resistance. First of all, there was no fighting, and unprovoked and without the Germans having asked, as they moved into Copenhagen, the social democratic government provided them with a list of all the communists that they could get. This is the legacy of the Danish ruling class.
Yes.
They don't care about anyone. They're just these kind of pathetic, how do you say, leeches on whichever big dog they can come around.
Yes. And if I can add one thing, just a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, the European capitalist powers went along with Biden's war against Russia in Ukraine. They cut themselves off from cheap energy, from imports from Russia, and they started purchasing much more expensive LNG gas resources from the United States. And now here we are and then Denmark played a big role in that, in pushing for, all forces to Ukraine against Russia.
They wanted America to fight Russia on their behalf. There was a politician, sorry, this is an aside, but this isn't funny. There's a politician in Denmark in the 80s, a right-wing populist politician. He made the point, he said, look, we don't have anything to fight. Let's disband the army and replace it with an answering machine that says, I surrender.
And he was right. That's the real position. And now, having cut themselves off from cheap energy from Russia that they were getting, and having created massive collapse of the European economy, particularly in Germany, as that's one of the factors at least. Now they find themselves that the United States is attacking them and threatening tariffs and so on.
Yeah.
And how are they going to retaliate? Oh no, we're not going to buy gas from you anymore. They cannot.
They're caught between a rock and a hard place. Exactly. What they want is to turn. They want to turn the clock back to the old world order where they were sitting at the table.
Yes.
And I think this is a key thing, because you see, they try to make it out as if we're all united against American imperialism, right? There is a massive reaction against American imperialism, against Trump, on the ground by the workers, the youth, who obviously see the naked imperialism of the US. And the ruling classes and the elites in the West are latching onto that, pretending like we're all in the same boat. But fundamentally, there's two paths here. There are two aims here. The aim of the ruling class in the West is to turn back time to the old world order, where they were sitting at the table.
Happy vassals.
They were happy vassals. They were eating and engorging themselves, you know, on the rest of the world. And now they're on the menu, right? Themselves.
Yes, exactly.
That's literally what's happening. And that's what they don't like. They don't care about the people of Greenland or the people of Denmark or the people of anywhere. They care about their own pockets, lining their own pockets.
Yes.
And Trump doesn't want to give them that. So they're in trouble.
Yes.
The rest of the population, they want to fight American imperialism. American imperialism has never been as unpopular and as hated as it is today. Outside of the West, it's always been hated by the vast majority of the people. But now in Europe and even in the US, the actions of the naked, open, way that the Americans are carrying themselves is raising a violent, radical mood against them. And all of these things is serving to unmask the real situation. Mark Carney had an interesting speech. I don't know if I should read out the whole thing. What do you think?
It is quite interesting. He was basically saying this is a rupture. It's not a conflict. It's a rupture. The past is gone. But then he described what the previous arrangement was, and I think it's worth reading because it's quite telling.
He says, for decades, countries like Canada prospered under what we call the rules-based international order. We joined its institutions, we praised its principles, and we benefited from its predictability. And because of that, we could pursue values-based foreign policies under its protection. We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, and we knew that international law applied by varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or of the victim.
Yeah, this is very true. But he says this was only partially the case. It was completely the case.
It was entirely the case.
Yes.
This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security. That's another euphemism for a very strong military. Yes. Collective so-called security, a big stick, in other words, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. In other words, a stick and the courts to impose that stick. So we placed the sign in the window, we participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality.
That is, they were being hypocritical, that's what it says.
That's what it says. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Stop invoking rules-based international order as though it still functions as advertised. Call it what it is, a system of intensifying great power rivalry, where the most powerful pursue their interests using economic integration as coercion. And
he is saying basically what is, and I think that he is clearer than some left-wing leaders who faced, say, with Venezuela, with the invasion of Venezuela by the United States. They say, but that's against the international law. Yeah. And Mark Carney here is telling you that international law doesn't matter. It never existed. In the past, it was hypocritical, and now I like to say a detail about Mark Carney. Mark Carney was the former governor of the Bank of England.
Yeah.
He was the governor of the Bank of England when the Bank of England decided to seize, 31 tons. Is it 31 tons? Anyway, $2 billion worth of gold that Venezuela had deposited in the Bank of England.
Yeah.
This is an act of imperialist aggression, theft. And so Mark Carney knows what he's talking about.
He knows what he's talking about. This is the
of
horse's mouth, right?
Yes.
There's been other revelatory events. Mark Rutte, Donald Trump is
made public the
publicizing
private conversations of all these people.
Yeah, Mark Rutte, the General Secretary of NATO, the biggest, strongest military alliance in the world, so-called strongest, or claimed to be. Mr. President, dear Donald, what you accomplished in Syria today is incredible. This is something we'll deal with in the future.
Yes.
The Islamist taking power in Syria, crushing everyone else, including the Kurds. I will use my media engagements in Davos to highlight your work there, in Gaza and in Ukraine.
This is groveling.
This shows what these are the people who are against the annexation of Greenland.
Yes.
But in Syria, great, working with the Islamists, perfect. In Gaza,
crushing the Kurds. Yes.
Fine. And in Ukraine, destroying a country, perfect. I am committed to finding a way forward on Greenland. Can't wait to see you. Yours, Mark. Oh my God, this is pathetic.
The other one is Macron as well.
Macron says, my friend, we are totally in line on Syria. Again, no problem supporting these disgusting creatures in Syria. We can do great things on Iran. Another country that's been on the receiving end.
Great things on Iran means bombing the country.
Iran, regime change in Iran, all of these things. I do not understand what you're doing on Greenland. Oh, that's a bit too much, right? Let's try to build great things. And then he talks about going to have a dinner in Davos and so on. But I think all of these things, just the reason why I'm saying is not just to laugh at them, but this is happening in front of everyone's eyes.
Yes.
For decades, the consensus in the West was, we will do the work here on the ground, and the people at the top, they know what they're doing. We have a democracy, we vote, and out of this vote, a consensus arises as to how to run the country, and the experts at the top will take care of it. And they have our interests at heart. And here we see, first of all, they're not experts at all. They're pathetic school children with well-made suits. And they're extremely reactionary. The true nature, the true nature of the ruling class is being exposed by all of these shocks. And I think also what Trump is doing, is shocking people. I think people in Scandinavia are just don't know what to do.
Yes.
Here you have very stable societies with in relation to the rest of the world, high living standards and extreme levels of stability. And suddenly this happens. What are you supposed to do about it, right? And you try to explain it away. Oh, it's Trump. Oh, it's this. Or this is a bad person. But then you see, no. The more events take place, the more you know they're all like this. They're all decrepit, rotten degenerates, and they are ruling our world, and they're driving it into a very, very bad place. And I think
the crisis of capitalism and the crisis of imperialism brings to the fore these types like Trump. And if you can say something for Trump, at least he's straight talking. When Macron says, "No, I'm not going to join your board of peace," he says, "Well, nobody cares about Macron. He's going to lose power soon." I mean, Macron is extremely unpopular politician. And I'm going to put 200% tariffs on French wine. And so Trump is also going out of his way to humiliate his so-called friends and allies in Europe. But the really pathetic part of this is that the so-called friends and allies in Europe, there's nothing they can do. Because the economic role, the economic weight of Europe in the world is no longer what it used to be many decades ago. Macron was speaking at Davos, and he was saying, "Oh, we need to increase our relations with China, but this must be on the basis of the Chinese transferring technology to Europe, not just selling us their products." This gives you a clear idea of the relationship between the two. China is an economy that's moving forward, dominating high technology sectors, and Europe is clearly lagging behind. And there's no way they can compete in this world.
And this is, we've said this before. We are moving towards a state of, how do you say, I want to use the word collapse, but maybe that's not the right word, but a deep crisis of European capitalism, where capitalism started. And maybe precisely for that reason, a deep crisis which will lead to enormous social contradictions, enormous social upheavals.
Because all of these people, Starmer, Macron, Merz, Meloni, whoever's in power in the main European countries will make the working class pay for the crisis of the system through cuts in pensions, cuts in living standards, increased military spending, cuts in healthcare and education. This is the policies they are already implementing. And it will only get worse. And the European working class is not going to take it just lying down. There's going to be a big response, the outlines of which we already saw at the end of last year.
Yes. I think that's a good place to end this segment. Obviously, the crisis of Europe is not going anywhere, and we'll come back to it at a later point. Now, as for our reader question, or listener question, sorry, today, is not just one question. This is something that has been posted in our comments section.
A lot.
By a lot, we mean regularly.
Yes.
And this is a question, as communists, obviously, we also meet that.
We get all the time.
Very, very often. And the question is, why do you have a MacBook? I don't know what qualifies a MacBook for something you shouldn't have as a communist. Someone else said, "Oh, you have IKEA cups." So what the
are they? They are IKEA cups.
These, I think that this one might not, but this one is definitely IKEA glass. Yeah. No, the question is obviously, why would you buy products from major capitalist companies if you're a communist? Shouldn't you be against capitalist companies, right? And
okay.
So how do we square that circle?
Yes. Well, we live in capitalism. All companies are capitalist. I mean, you have a MacBook.
Yeah.
I have a Lenovo, second-hand Lenovo Chinese computer. They both made by capitalist companies, which make
probably in the same factory, by the way.
Yes, in China probably, which make profits by exploiting the labor power of working class people. This is how capitalism works, and we are against capitalism, yes, but at the moment we live in capitalism. We are organizing against it, but. I mean, what is the implication of this question? Is the implication that we should be building our own computers, producing
artisanal computers? Yes. We should withdraw into the forest and build our own computers.
Yes. I mean, there are some people who think that way, right? You live in capitalism, and therefore, just by living within this system, you're complicit with the system.
Yeah.
No, we're not complicit with the system. We are exploited by the capitalists, right? And we are organizing against. But some people think, or some people argue that the way forward is to opt out of capitalism, to withdraw from it, to go into, I don't know, self-reliance. Yeah, as you say, artisan, handicraft production, and this is not what communism is about. Well, communism is based on the most developed means of production that society has created over 10,000 years of development of civilization. And on that basis, all the accumulated human knowledge, know-how, technology, the productivity of labor, on that basis, we will build communism.
Yes. I think there are two questions here. One is this question of self-reliance and kind of retreating from society. there's a big mistake in here. I mean, you, as an individual, you can do it or not, but politically, is a highly problematic proposition, because this society can only be changed through the collective actions of the working class. We've seen today in Minneapolis, what's happening is the working class becoming aware of his power as a collective, of itself
starting to exercise
as a class. The idea of retreating from society, artisans, and so on, is the idea of fighting capitalism through atomization, which is precisely what the capitalists want. This is no threat to capitalism whatsoever. The only threat to capitalism is a higher collective consciousness of the working class and the broader layers, the oppressed and the poor layers of the masses. That's one of the problems I find in this matter. The other thing is capitalism is the first system which socializes production. Now, this is a double-edged sword, because for most people, this means you cannot escape from capitalism unless you're willing to take the extremely harsh decision to move into a forest, which is difficult, and how are you going to establish a life? How are you going to get your things, by the way? You will be in contact with capitalism. Capitalism has socialized production in the sense that it encompasses everyone and everything. You cannot stand outside of it.
It has conquered the whole world.
Everyone participates in capitalist
Production.
production in one way or another, and everyone plays a role in this system. The other side of it is, this is a great thing, because for the first time in the world, you have production of such a scale and such depth and specialization that you can use that to eradicate all of the problems of capital. Poverty, homelessness, and you name it. The conditions are there to remove those things. We are not, how do you say?
Luddites.
We're not Luddite. We don't want to destroy factories. We don't want to destroy companies. Apple is a huge company that has enormous potential, as long the main problem is controlled by individuals who do not have the same interests as the rest of society. In other words, production is social, ownership is private. That's the problem. We don't want to get rid of Apple. We don't want to destroy Apple. We want to take over Apple. Apple should be taken over by the working class, and so should Google and Meta and all of the other technology.
And Lenovo.
And Lenovo, by the way. Yes. And their resources should be pooled instead of competing against one another, instead of suing each other, instead of using intellectual property to stifle development. All of these resources should be used to to produce the best possible technology to ease the lives of ordinary people and reduce waste and all of these other things.
The democratic planning of the resources that already exist.
Exactly. Do you have anything else to add?
I have one more point to add, is that Hamid here is using his MacBook computer, and I'm using my Lenovo computer, and we use it to play chess sometimes.
Oh!
And I have a confession to make. At the end of last year, we played a chess game, and was it for the first time? Well,
second.
Anyway,
the first time was by chance.
Okay. Hamid beat me at chess in a long, protracted battle that had different phases.
It was a positional game.
Yes.
And I won, and I'm very proud of it. Finally beat Jorge Martín.
With the help of with the assistance of a MacBook computer.
Practice makes champion. And this is, by the way, the second victory that I have had over you.
Oh, yes.
I also won
a bet
on whether the Russians would take Pokrovsk before Christmas or not. Although it's debated whether they have actually fully taken it or not.
Yes.
Well, we can leave that as a tie, maybe.
Yes.
But you still owe me £10.
I did pay already.
Yes, I think with that we can end our program. We'll be back again next week, 6 p.m. And for all of you out there, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, ask your questions. We're getting so many good questions in the comment sections. And we'll be back again next Thursday. Thank you very much.